Today I'm actually going to be presenting some work from two fence line trials that were done in 2012. These trials are part of the national GRDC funded project, which is actually led by Chris Preston from the University of Adelaide. I work for Department of Agriculture, but where is the pointy thing? Oh, here it is. But as you can see, all of the here we go, down the bottom here are all the other partners. New South Wales DPI, University of Western Australia, Queensland Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry, and, oh yes, I think I said them all. And University of Adelaide, of course. Well, Chris Preston is there, so it's actually a University of Adelaide project. The project is funded through the Australian Glyphosate Sustainability Working Group, which is a bit of a mouthful until you hear the name of the project. It's actually understanding and management of resistance to Group M, Group L and Group I herbicides. And in case you didn't know which ones they are, we have Group M, which is Roundup, Group L, spray seed, and Group I, the phenoxies, of which 2,4-D is one. Now, the aims of this project is to develop strategies to reduce the onset of herbicide resistance and increase grower awareness, especially of glyphosate and phenoxy resistance. And within this project are farm advisor learning groups, and there are two in Western Australia. The first one here is the Northern Group, and as you can see, there's a pile of names up there. There's actually 19 members, including myself, and the range of members come from private consulting firms, chemical industry and DAFWA, and now ARI, because Peter Newman is in that group and he's now with ARI, and also Plant Farm. And the North was chosen as an area for an advisor group due to the high levels of phenoxy resistance in wild radish. And here we are on July 25 at the fence line site at DAFWA. This is one of the sites for the Levy Group field walk, and this is actually before it's been sprayed here. The Esperance Group has 11 members, including myself. Obviously, they're not all pictured there. The Esperance was chosen because it has a really high level of annual ryegrass resistance to glyphosate, and it's higher than the rest of the state. And this is probably due to the high incidence of summer rain and the need to spray several times before sowing. Okay, glyphosate resistance in annual ryegrass. This is probably our major focus. 36% of confirmed sites from around Australia are from fence lines and fire breaks. And why is this? Probably due to the intensive use of glyphosate every year or multiple times a year, and the heavy reliance of glyphosate for weed control. Annual ryegrass is a major fence line weed. It's a grass species, it's an obligate outcrosser, and has the ability to survive and produce seeds under various adverse conditions. As a result, it tends to spread very quickly across fence lines and into cropping fields. Therefore, the management of glyphosate-resistant ryegrass in fence lines is really, really important to stop it moving into the cropping fields. This site is actually from Clare in South Australia, and it's a site from Peter Britsalis, who many of you know. That's him right there. And you may have sent various weed seeds or cuttings to him for herbicide resistance testing through his plant science consulting. Now, on to the actual fence line trials. Both groups decided to do a fence line trial in 2012, and both groups decided that they would be featured in field days. The Northern group decided to hold theirs at the Levy Group field day at DAFWA, and the Esperance group wanted one at the SEPWA field day on Esperance Downs Research Station. Each trials had 13 treatment alternatives to glyphosate, and they were both sprayed in August. They are either sprayed as a single knockdown herbicide, paraquat, amitrol T, glyphosate or alliance, or as a mixture of a residual herbicide and paraquat, except in the case of esperance there were 3 treatments that were, the tank partner was alliance, which is, for those of you who don't know, is paraquat and amitrol. Now here we have esperance. Now this is actually a glyphosate susceptible site, annual ryegrass at Z30 to 31. As you can see, it's pretty robust looking ryegrass. There was also barley grass, brome grass, cakeweed and some clover on the site in fairly decent sort of numbers, and also there was some mallow, erodium, Guildford grass and hare's tail grass. Esperance had 500 millimetres of annual and 300 millimetres of growing season rainfall in 2012. So it rained early, it had lots of weeds. These results are actually, I thought, in the book, but this year we're not having them in the book. They're actually on the website. So there is a paper on the website which actually has a few more results in there. There were 13 treatments, as I said, or 14 including the glyphosate, but I'm only going to speak about 11 of these because some of the products were not registered. But the results are in the book. They're just, the ingredients aren't listed, but if you wanted to have a look, not the book, sorry, the website again. The results. Now on the y-axis are visual assessments taken at 5 weeks after herbicide application and as a percentage of the control. I've shown the results for annual ryegrass and for the combination of broadleaves, which is mainly a combination of clover and cakeweed. And I haven't shown the other grasses, but they behaved very similar to the ryegrass. As you can see, the glyphosate did particularly well. It's got 100% and nearly on 100% control of the weeds. And this is why it's our favourite herbicide. We love glyphosate. But remember, this is a glyphosate susceptible site, so obviously if it was resistant, we wouldn't have got those results. Mixture of a residual and a knockdown gave the best results for the annual ryegrass control. Now that's in blue, so if you look at the blue bars here, we actually have hexazinone, bromacil, and simazine, hexazinone, bromazine, simazine and alliance, and trimac and alliance. If you look at the blue lines, they all worked particularly well. They all controlled annual ryegrass well. In the broadleaves though, which are the red ones, most of them are the 2 hexazinone and bromacil also controlled them fairly well. But when you added the simazine and the trimac, when you actually added the alliance instead of the paraquat as the tank mix partner, you actually got much better control of the broadleaves. Oops, sorry. As I said before, I'll just show you a couple of pictures. The best combination were a residual and paraquat. And we've got, these are the ones with paraquat. We've got hexazinone, which is Grunt and Velpar. This is a very soluble product, and it's not actually registered specifically for fence lines, but for commercial and industrial uses rights away and around agricultural buildings. It's also very soluble, and you risk the of having off-target action and killing a few other things. Because it's quite soluble. Bromacil also worked well. That's Hive-RX. It's also not registered specifically for fence lines, but for commercial and industrial areas rights away and around agricultural buildings as well. I can talk about these because they are registered for those things, but it's also very expensive. And the same deal, it's a long-term residual, so if you might kill your trees with it, so it's one to be careful of. And then we've got the trimac, which is terbacil and sulfametron. This is actually registered for fence lines. It's not a hazardous product until you add paraquat, of course. and it's also got a low toxicity to environment, this particular one. Now I just thought I'd show you the simazine and the paraquat. The simazine, it did a really good job on the grasses, but as you can see it didn't do that well on the broadleaves, as you could see from the graph. The paraquat is traditionally poor on capeweed, clover and geraniums, which were actually in the dominant mix. But as soon as you added Alliance, it actually bumped up the control of the broadleaf, and you can see quite a good control. These are all dead broadleaves, by the way, those little ones there. Glyphosate, back to the glyphosate. As you can see, at 5 weeks it did really, really well. But at 12 weeks, we've also had another germination. So 900 grams of active ingredient at 5 weeks did well, but then at 12 weeks we got another germination, and of course then by the time January comes around you're actually getting seed set and various other things. Of course you could spray again, but you also run the risk of adding an extra glyphosate shot every time you use that on its own. The non-residual herbicides at Esperance, they did quite poorly at Esperance on the weeds, mainly probably due to the big size of the weeds. The paraquat, glyphosate, amitrol and Alliance on its own, although it actually did a little bit better. Just quickly I'll go through those. There's Alliance at 5 weeks and Alliance at 12 weeks, and as you can see that Alliance on its own, it wasn't the only thing in the simazine Alliance mix that actually killed all the weeds. And also you risk further germination, as you can see, at 12 weeks. Amitrol was a really interesting one. It did an okay job on a lot of the grasses early on, but at 12 weeks, Ligurus, which is that hare's tail grass, which is that fluffy thing, I used to call it squirrel tails or squirrel something when I was a kid. I can't remember what, but anyway, it seems to have taken over the plot, and it took over all of the reps of the amitrol plots, but it wasn't in any of the other plots at all. So that was interesting. Ligurus is hairy, so presumably amitrol had a problem with penetration. But remember, all of the treatments except the Roundup Attack and the Basta actually had 1% BS 1000 or equivalent added, so it wasn't it had things added to help with the penetration. Anyway. Finally, the glyphosate or the Basta. As you can see, it actually did a better job on the broadleaves than the grasses. But glyphosate actually needs warm temperature to work, so this was sprayed in August, and so it's probably one of our coldest months, so it actually didn't do so well. DAFWA. Now this was also a glyphosate susceptible annual ryegrass site. We couldn't find any sites that had full-blown glyphosate resistant ryegrass like they had in Clare on that photo I showed you before. But it was a very dry site. It only had 229 millimetres of annual and 130 millimetres of growing season rainfall. So even in August, the annual ryegrass was only at 3 to 4 leaf. And there was some wild radish and capeweed at this site as well. The knockdowns did much better at DAFWA, especially the paraquat, as you can see. And as I said before, probably at Esperance, the knockdowns alone, when they were just by themselves, didn't do as well at the Esperance site because of the size of the weeds. But again, the best treatments were the residual plus paraquat treatments. There was no mixtures with Alliance at the DAFWA site, and so they were all mixed with paraquat. The best were the hexazinone, bromacil, and Trimac, and simazine came in at about 4th. The other one that did really well was Arsenal Express, which is this one here on the edge. But that's actually a mixture of glyphosate and imazapyr, which is a group B. So if you're trying not to spread glyphosate or group B resistance from your fence lines, it's probably not the best option. So how much do they cost? This is dollars per kilometre based on a 3 metre wide fence line. Glyphosate obviously is a cheap option. It's what everybody uses. Paraquat comes in a little bit later. Alliance on its own costs $18 per kilometre. Then we actually have hexazinone and paraquat, which was also the same price as Alliance. But as I said to you before, it's highly soluble and you do run the risk of off-target, killing things that you don't want to. The bromacil and the paraquat, that one did really well as well, but as you can see, it's really expensive at $110. The simazine and paraquat was quite cheap at $11, but my favourite, my bang for buck actually is the simazine and Alliance mix. $24, it's more expensive than your straight glyphosate or paraquat, but relatively cheap. It's fairly safe, and it did quite a good job really, and it's registered and all of the above. The other one that is worth noting is the Trimac, which is a mixture of terbacil and sulfametron, and paraquat or Trimac and Alliance. You're bumping up the dollars per kilometre there, but it did do quite a good job, and it's also registered for fence lines. As I said before, both sites were shown at field days at the SEPOL, which is the EDRS, the Excellence Downs Research Station, or the main Levy field day, which was at DAFWA. And this is the SEPOL field day on September 12. At both field days, we actually got the growers to do a blind rating and to choose their top 3 herbicide treatments. Now, for those of you in the room that actually do field days, or if you're doing herbicide field days, I recommend giving them a blind rating. The growers just really got off on it, and they were really excited about it, as you can see. And at the Esperance Down field day, we actually had 120 people on one bus stop, which was far too many people, I thought, to handle, but giving them a blind rating was just great. And then after that, we gave them the results of what they'd chosen. At Esperance, the top 3 were hexazinone, bromacil and the in-trade mix, and that's not actually, I didn't talk about that one today because it's actually not registered as yet. Hopefully, maybe, we'll have to see. And but that was the results are on the website in the paper. But one of the other things we actually asked the growers, we gave them a survey about what they do with their fence lines and how much they were worried about it leaving, sort of moving out of their fence lines into their paddocks. And we asked them how much they were willing to spend. And most of them said that around $50 per hectare or $20 to $30 a kilometre was quite reasonable if they could prevent their glyphosate resistance spreading. So the key messages are that there are effective herbicide options other than glyphosate available. Probably one of your best option is to use a knockdown herbicide plus a residual to give that flexibility of management so that you can spray when you're, after you've done the rest of your property, because a lot of growers leave their fence lines to the end. And for my money, this is just me, simazine and Alliance was for me a good pick. And knockdown herbicides alone have shown they show a good initial control, but later germinations reduce their effectiveness. As I said before, this is a national project, and there's a national newsletter called Giving a Rats. Now, RATS is actually an acronym for resistance, application, tactics and systems. And the project leader is Chris Preston from the University of Adelaide, who many of you may know. The newsletter editor is Andrew Storey, And Steve Powers is also part of this project and contributes to this newsletter. So there's some resistance heavyweights in this project that contribute to this newsletter. So if you haven't subscribed, do so. If you haven't got your smartphones on and get that QR code happening now, then just giving a rat's a Google and you should be able to find it. And finally, I'd like to thank GRDC for funding this work, DAFWA and the other partners in this project, Chris Matthews from DAFWA Esperance and Dave Nicholson from DAFWA Geraldton for spraying the trials, and both teams, because these two advisor groups, I'm not the leader, I'm just the coordinator, and these are their trials and I'm just presenting the results. Thank you.
Has there been any work done with local councils and government departments who are big users of fence line spraying?
Well, the Australian Glyphosate Sustainability Working Groups, I know this because Andrew Story, who I said is the newsletter editor, is also my husband, and there has been I think it was a Riddick funded project, where they actually looked at the other people who use glyphosate, so on roadsides and councils and all sorts of other things. So I do know that they've looked at their use and also looking at the kind of level of knowledge that they know and the kind of actually education perhaps that they need to be able to, realise that glyphosate resistance, especially in some of our fence lines, not just for annual ryegrass but for fleabane and other weeds, needs to be addressed. Does that answer your question? Yes.
Is there any other questions? Yep. I've got another one.
Yes.
So the high use of glyphosate on fence lines is quite obvious because it is cheap and it is safe for operators to use. Have you had any discussion with producers about moving away from that product and their reliance on that product because it is cheap and safe?
One of the things with this project, fence lines and herbicide trials make fabulous hooks to get growers to come along to field days. They love herbicides, they just love them. But it's also really teaching them, or informing them about the risk of glyphosate and of developing in their fence lines, and also, getting them to think about their fence lines as not just the last job on the farm.